now we bring to you Dallas Cowboys Executive Vice President Stephen Jones. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, guys.
Now, we heard you talking during the presser yesterday, and I've always been kind of curious about this. Once you set your board, do you go into drafts with general thoughts about trading up or down in terms of perceived value? Like, do you say, hey, the top 15 is strong, or hey, this draft has a ton of second-round grades, so we need to be more open to that? Like, how does that process go for you?
Yeah, I mean, you go through all the above, and certainly you go through mock drafts. You go through a lot of different things. We obviously, we know what it takes to get to, certain points of the draft. If, there happens to be a player that starts to come our way that was unexpected, then you look at that. So, we call them strategy sessions, but they go from everything from mock drafts to potential scenarios to move up or down.
I just actually saw this on our fan text, Stephen. I thought it was a pretty intriguing question. Is there a possibility of moving a pick for another veteran, kind of like y'all did with Gilmore?
Well, you don't ever rule anything out. Obviously, you're in quick evaluation mode. And I'll say this, veterans right before the draft usually come at a good price. After the draft, then things go back up again, and people aren't valuing picks as much because you're a year away from using them, and harder to make something happen. So there have been some things where people might be fire selling a veteran, but one of the problems you got is usually when you're talking about trading a guy, which it did with both Gilmore and Cooks, you're there's the evaluation, and a lot of times having to work through with an agent what the contract's going to look like if we make the trade.
Stephen, what is the strongest position depth-wise in this draft?
That's a good question. In general, believe it or not, which happens to work good for us, I'd say probably tight ends, through about 5-6 rounds, if not the full draft. And then, probably behind that would be, and usually it's not a surprise, the running backs. There's usually always a good group of running backs to choose from, and probably same holds for receivers. I mean, depending on what your flavor is for what you may be looking for that particular year, there's always a lot of receivers as well.
Stephen, sometimes you'll bring up the best available and then position need. You'll kind of combo that up just a little bit, and I know you guys have done a really good job of making sure that position needs not necessarily a problem for you this year. Great work there. But let's say you have, I'm going to just, for an example, the number one tight end is sitting there on the board, and maybe you were like looking at, maybe you needed a defensive tackle too, but it's the number 3 defensive tackle. Is it more important to get the better player at his position?
No, I think it's all has to do with the grade. I mean, the best tight end grade may be a 117, and your third and fourth defensive tackles may be 117s. And so as long as they're, within that range, or a 118 or a 116, or, when you're talking, either first half or back half within a half a round, then you just start to go with where, what player you think fits you the best at that point. I mean, you don't necessarily say you always go a 117 over a 118, regardless of what position he may play. I think when you're, that tight, now if you're talking about a 115 versus a 125, then you start to, I don't know what word you want to use, but you start to go away from the integrity of your board.
Yesterday it sounded like, and you can correct me if I was wrong, y'all said y'all's board has not been locked in yet. Is that correct? And if so, when does the board usually get locked in?
I think our goal is to have it pretty much locked in, but everybody, you can always, if you get information or someone starts to feel uneasy and they want to bring something up, that's always it can always be a work in progress. We don't ever have a date that just says, okay, after today, we're not going to touch it again. That's not how we operate. If you want to look at us, there may be other teams who just say, hey, after a certain day, we don't touch it. But, we look at it as always a work in progress. But I would say, in general, pretty much, we've been working hard on different, groupings of players in terms of, if you got a group of, 6, 7, 8 receivers in the 5th round, you're really starting then to grind on, how would they fit us best? And we call them pods, and they get in there and work through all that. But, all that work's been done, and we're going to, get the results of that and work through all that, and hopefully have our final board, unless we decide to tweak something, up here by the end of the day.
Now, back in 2003, the Cowboys took Terrence Newman with the number 5 pick. But what I really wanted to know is, were you basking in the glow of that pick, or did you have the opportunity to watch the Minnesota Vikings get skipped over twice because their time just ran out? And what do you remember about that?
I just remember that they were not picking, and we were turning our pick in, and we had some visitation with the Vikings about that pick. I do remember that, not the gory details, but, certainly if you're not trading with that team that's on the clock and their time runs out and you're right behind them, you damn sure put your card in. You want to be prepared to put your card in so you get your guy.
Man, that's interesting to me. I always say this. It feels like, getting the phone call, getting a call from somebody that's ready to make an offer is a lot more of a position of like leverage and power. Is that kind of the feeling whenever you're picking up going, oh, they want to trade up right now? Let's see what they have to offer.
Yeah, and usually that's where it comes. I mean, usually if you're calling backwards, it's not very fruitful.
Yeah.
I mean, they'll consider it. I mean, they take your call, obviously, but usually the sincere ones are the ones saying, my guy's there, I want to give you this, and will you take it? And we may say, well, we kind of got a player we like here, you're going to have to do better than that. So, those are, kind of the conversations. But usually the most serious calls are the ones when you're on the clock or right before you're on the clock, they're calling you saying, hey, if my guy gets through this pick, we'd be willing to trade with you. And obviously they probably hadn't been able to make the team trade with the team in front of us.
How frequently does their guy, and you're like, well, who is that? Like, do you ask for the names?
Hey, if you don't ask, you don't get the information. A lot of times they won't. And then there are some shenanigans of, well, is he offense or defense? that type of thing. So, it's interesting. I mean, it's certainly competitive as hell. It's serious, as we all know how serious it is. And but there is that type of, those type of exchanges.
So I know, listening to Brian Broaddus, he's brought up this linebacker from Arkansas, Drew Sanders, and I know your son was there, who possibly was a teammate of his. How much do you guys like Drew Sanders?
Yeah, he's a really unique football player. Played right here at Denton Ryan. Played tight end and quarterback, and I think he, had the choice to go to Oklahoma as a tight end or Alabama as a linebacker, and I think he chose, I know he chose Alabama as a linebacker. John Stephen played against him in one of the state championship games, maybe. But he's a younger player than him, and John Stephen had left. Sanders played 1 year at Arkansas, which was this year, and, transferred in from Alabama and, was wanting to have a change of scenery, had a great year with Arkansas, and I think he's a very unique player. He understands the game well. He's a coach's son. Dad's a high school football coach. He knows what it takes. He's got great, football IQ, great football and instincts, and a really good football player.
So I know last year, the majority of the time, Micah Parsons played at defensive end. I know he played a little bit at linebacker. I was wondering what your thoughts are, kind of according to the draft here, too, on how you want to use Micah this upcoming season based off of maybe if you have to draft maybe another defensive end versus another linebacker situation.
Yeah, I think all that's a work in progress. Obviously, what Micah gives you is that versatility, and certainly, Dan has a unique way of knowing what he wants to do philosophically, defensively for us. And, when we're all said and done, those discussions go on. Does this affect the way you would play Micah? I mean, obviously Drew can play, inside what we call the Mike and Will, or he can flex out and rush the passer. He started out, at Arkansas, really rushing the passer. I think at one point in time he led the nation, was leading the nation in sacks, but then they ended up having to move him inside. He didn't rush as much, but was very effective as a behind the line of scrimmage linebacker. So he's a versatile player.
When you tell us about the value in the draft and everything, I've always been curious about this. How much do you guys have to look ahead to, like, let's say, the class of 2024 in case somebody does come a calling and they're like, hey, and we'll give you our first round pick for next year, or we'll give you our second next year? Like, do you guys have some preliminary scouting for next year's draft in case those kind of offers come around?
No, I mean, I think where that would come into play would be at the very top of the draft. And, hey, there's going to be some, which our guys are aware, there may be some good quarterbacks available. And if you were trying to, set yourself up for a good young quarterback at the top of the draft, and that might come into play. But in general, I don't think there's, detailed work on, hey, this draft's going to be loaded through 4 rounds or that type of thing. I just think you want to get your value for your picks, knowing that, most of the time there's going to be really good first-round players, really good second-round players, and on and on and on. And so you just make you make that determination just based on value, where you are with your team, and how you feel, where the draft sits at that particular time, if you're willing to, trade this year's pick for a next year's pick.
So, Stephen, I know it's a different draft, but in the NBA, teams will go to drafting teenagers over, let's say, juniors or seniors because they think there's more potential with age. I'm wondering, and I know you guys are locked in at quarterback for a long time, but when it comes to quarterbacks who maybe are going into the draft at 24, 25 years old, or maybe even other positions, how much do you take their age into consideration when drafting high?
I think you always do that. I mean, there's no question. I mean, you draft it, you draft young guys. Tyron Smith, I think he was 18 when we drafted him. And that was a huge plus to think that the guy's already playing at this level, that Pac-10, and, he's only 18 years old. It's only going to get better. And I think Zach Martin, we drafted him either a year or two after Tyron, and he was, Tyron's same age. So, you still, if they're great players, whether they're 24 or they're 21, it's going to be hard not to pick them, but it certainly adds, it's a check mark in the positive direction if the player's younger.
Stephen, I remember covering the Desperados, and Will McClay was your head coach for the Desperados then, and I had some really good conversations with him. I was kind of wondering if you can describe just how much he's grown within this organization and how and why you guys trust him the way you do.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think Jerry said it in the press conference yesterday. I mean, Will is just outstanding. He's got a great way about himself, his skill set, and how he works with not only his staff as a leader, the college scouts, the pro scouts, but also his interactions, I think, are just, unique and rare in terms of how he interacts with our coaching staffs over the years, whether it's a Rod Marinelli or a Dan Quinn, whether it's Jason, whether it's Mike McCarthy, whether it's Bill Parcells. He's just, he's got a great way of pulling out the information that, he feels like his staff needs, his scouting, college scouts, pro scouts, getting the vision for what Mike McCarthy, how he's going to be a little different than Kellen, and what's his vision for what he needs for players to have success. Same thing for Dan. I think Dan's been great, along with his defensive staff, of giving us a vision for the type of players he needs to, be and operate at the highest level of defense. So, I think he's outstanding like that. He understands, you need buy-in, from the coaches to the scouts to the, training guys, Jim Maurer and Britt Brown, to the off-the-field group that help us there. It's a consensus, and it's we have to execute the mechanics of it. And, Will's done a great job of, really organizing and leading the way there. I mean, we're fortunate. As Jerry said, we don't like to talk about him too much because we don't want to ever lose him. So, but he knows, where he is in terms of how we feel about him and the job he does for the Cowboys.
Well, we appreciate the time, as always, good sir, and we'll catch you again Friday after the first round of the draft.
Sounds great, gentlemen. Thank you.